Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the way Brexit debate could be shifting before the next general election and how I think Labour really need to do better in giving themselves the room to manoeuvre as necessary. Trying to avoid Brexit elephant traps is one thing, but they can actually not ignore Brexit itself. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, as I've said multiple times, I will absolutely, and I still will say this, I'll absolutely support any strategic play by Labour that wins them power. Makes no difference what I think is the best for the country. I'm not in line to form a government. The choice is always down to one of two prime ministers at any election in this country, and the Labour prime minister will always be the closest to what I think is best all day long. And if Labour believe that their stated Brexit policies of yes to closer alignment with the EU, but no to single market membership is how they win power, fine. After all, we need alignment before we can rejoin anything anyway, so it's still a policy that goes in the right direction. I've also made the point in the past that we do not have the polling data that Labour do. Forget about polls which show what most of the public want, or most of the country wants, or however it phrases it, or even most of the voting public. These people do not decide whether Labour or the Conservatives form a government or not. The people who decide whether or not Labour get their leader into Downing Street are the roughly 250,000 swing voters in roughly 100 seats that we hope will change hands at the next election. Have you seen the polls that target these 250,000 people? I haven't, but Labour should be getting them. That being said, Brexit as a concept is highly chaotic. Labour are trying to work towards a series of key policy proposals that they hope will win them support for the next election. But the whole thing is in flux. There are two massive unknowns at play here, which make political strategy incredibly tricky. The first is we do not know when that general election will be. It is most likely to be January 2025, which is the latest possible time it can be held, because the Tories would be insane to go for a general election while they are behind in the polls. And obviously Labour must remain ahead in the polls. But there is a credible possibility that it could be held this year still, because at the end of the day, Tory MPs are insane. You know, it might be held next year or in 2024. We don't know. There are credible ways it could be held this year, next year, the year after, or right at the start of 2025. And what would win a general election this year may not work in 2 years' time. Our economy and society in general is basically out of control. The second massive unknown is what those swing voters will think about Brexit over the next couple of years. Labour's target voters are not necessarily fans of Brexit. In fact, most are not. It's just that they are sick of the pain and division caused by years of trying to leave the EU. Most wish we never had, but we have. What they don't want is a load more pain to try and reverse it. So I can see why Labour have avoided being labelled by the Tories as wanting to inflict that pain on them. But membership of the single market wouldn't result in pain. Rejoining the EU would be an arduous process with lots of negotiations taking many years. And there is no way, even if there were the political will, that Keir Starmer can be the Prime Minister that leads us back into the EU. It will take too long. You know, and we can't even begin the process until the issue is politically settled in the UK anyway. That means that any future government has to be on board with it. That means the Conservatives. Not the case right now. But joining the single market just requires us to agree to the rules and make sure the necessary infrastructure is in place. Well, that's way less work than trying to get the infrastructure for our hard Brexit. That's what they need to try and explain. We need a right load of infrastructure to be able to implement this hard Brexit. We need way less to implement membership of the single market. It's less painful to join the single market. If they don't want to attack Brexit as a concept yet, which I understand, I do feel there's an opportunity to draw a distinction. Explain that what's causing us the most pain is the hard Brexit. Say that the Norway Brexit that they all banged on about in 2016 is way easier, and call it that. Call it the Norway Brexit. It's not a slight on Norway, because it's a term that's familiar and that Brexiteers actually argued for. And calling it the Norway Brexit is still Brexit, isn't it? Still arguing for Brexit, isn't it? For those who don't think it's best to reverse it. But it's also a move in the right direction for those of us who want it reversing. I mean, I get that Labour want to play a low-risk strategy on Brexit and to focus on the economy, health, cost of living mostly. They want to shift the debate away from Brexit and onto more traditional politics where Boris Johnson's Tories cannot compete. Brexit is still too divisive and, above all, subjective. And what a populist leader like Boris Johnson's really good at is winning subjective arguments. It's an ideology, a religion of sorts, not a concrete philosophy. But it's going to be there. Come what may, and whenever the next election is, Brexit's going to be a big part of the discussion. Right now, if we have a general election this year, Labour's current policies will be fine. They'll get away with it. Because polling tends to indicate that Brexit is not considered a big issue for voters. They're not that bothered about it. And I also know from Labour canvassers in their target seats that they find it's not a big issue at the door either. People that they're targeting are basically happy that Brexit's done. It's not an issue for them now for the next election. But what if this changes? Consider just how much Brexit has been exposed in the year and a half since we left the customs union single market. Think of the changes that are obvious to us all, not just those under the bonnet that are being noticed by experts. We can see that there's less choice in the shops. We can see that fruit and veg is not always as fresh as it was. We can see the very short dates on various foods in the chiller sections. We can see that foods sometimes are just not available at all. Sometimes they are, they're there, and then a couple of weeks they're not, and then they're back again. We can see that the prices are going up, not just for food. But there's been a shift in the way Brexit is presented now. Last year, too many business leaders ignored Brexit as the cause for the problems. They didn't really ignore it, they just didn't talk about it to the media. They would either blame something else or use language that meant Brexit, but without being specific. And they did this largely because they feared that attacking Brexit would mean they lose their lines of communication to ministers and so lose their power to influence policy. They thought it's better to sort of not upset the government and try and steer their policy towards something more sensible. Perhaps they've now decided that this influence isn't helping policy anyway, so sod it. Because more and more business leaders are explicitly blaming Brexit for the problems. CEO of Sainsbury's recently said this is Brexit. Didn't say that last year, did they? No, tried to hide the cause last year. This year it's like, nah, this is Brexit, mate. They are less inclined to cover up for a government that is hurting them and hurting their customers. In a year's time, we may see many more adopting this position. Travel's a big one. A lot of those swing voters like their foreign holidays. Their eyes are being opened up quite a bit this year. This summer is going to see them hit with Brexit travel delays. Sometimes delays so bad they miss their flight altogether. And then think about what happens once the biometric checks come in for all ports later this year. 2023 is going to be a complete disaster for Brexit. You are going to see way fewer ordinary people standing up for Brexit, mark my words. You know, the usual gobshites have already nailed their colours to the mast, but people you know at work or down the pub, they're going to go a lot quieter on Brexit. And once they've stopped mouthing off, pretty much the only voices you're going to start to hear are those of people with a plan. Or maybe a smug look on the face going, I told you so. That works too. In another year, by the end of summer 2023, let's say, people are going to start seeing that Brexit is going badly wrong, and the only people who sound like they have a plan to fix it are those talking about how much easier it was inside the single market. Because Brexit was sold on this fantasy future that people couldn't compare to. We can compare it. We can still remember what it was like in the single market just about. When this shift in public attitude comes, Labour cannot afford to be left behind. It would be best, I think, if they could lead this shift in public attitude. But I do understand that they'll be cautious to adopt a position ahead of time that is not certain to be echoed amongst their target voters. Because although the way I'm talking, I don't want to make it sound like it's inevitable there'll be sudden falling of the scales from the eyes next year and that suddenly the country will see that Brexit's a right shit show. It may not. It may not. You know, it's disappointing. Like I say, Labour have to focus on winning that election, and that means a certain amount of caution. And that election could come before the big shift in public opinion as well. But I do worry they're potentially boxing themselves into the point where they will resist the tide longer than they need to. Ideally, what they want to be doing is holding a position until they're free to go and then going. I'm not sure they're doing that, because consider the only reason they are adopting their anti-single market stance is to stop the Tories painting them as the party who will bring back the pain of Brexit divisions. That's it. They don't believe in Brexit. Starmer and other senior members of the party have been unequivocal in their condemnation of Brexit in the past. But we now saw the spectacle of a couple of days ago, 2 or 3 days ago, depending on when this video comes out, of Yvette Cooper trying to waffle her way through a ridiculous policy position the other day on the radio interview. And it reminded me of a few years ago, an interview with Emily Thornberry before Brexit, trying to explain Labour's Brexit position under Corbyn. She's an intelligent, articulate MP, but it was an utter shambles. And I got the same feeling as I listened to Cooper, because she's also intelligent and articulate. And when an intelligent, articulate MP cannot explain their party's policy without tying themselves in knots, you know the policy is not only wrong, but against the general spirit of what your party stands for. Because it's actually easy to argue for something that's wrong. Arguing for a bad policy is a piece of piss. It's so easy that even Johnson's idiot cabinet can do it. What's difficult is arguing for a bad policy that you know is bad. Because your brain rebels against your mouth. It doesn't come out properly. And the simplest question makes the whole thing fall apart. Alistair Campbell, a former Labour advisor, has been arguing that the party need to analyse the problem, come up with a policy which they can communicate to the public. And I absolutely agree, and I think they need to prioritise this summer. I sort of agree it doesn't necessarily have to be their current policy, arguably can't be their current policy. Because not only is it the wrong one, which is less important in opposition actually, but it's not really showing itself to be a vote winner. Even given that I don't have access to their targeted polling, like I say, what I do know is this: if you cannot get one of your brightest MPs to explain a policy without tying yourself in knots, and most of the media is backing the Tories, you're in for a rough time. They will expose the frailties in your policy mercilessly. They will cover for weak Tory policy, but they will obliterate any weakness in Labour. And I don't think this has to be done in a massive hurry. Like I say, I think they'd get away with it for an election this year, because not enough are seeing that link between Brexit and their suffering. I just don't believe that this will remain the case when politics and Brexit remain highly volatile in the UK. And bear in mind, we do not think that Boris Johnson has the legs to lead the Tories into the next election, if that next election is in 2025. So I don't believe Labour is in a position that they can maintain into 2024 or beyond. You know, and it may be that they don't intend to. I don't know what they're discussing behind closed doors. Maybe they're actually planning to about face and to hell with accusations of U-turns. You know, the most damning insult in British politics, the old U-turn. I mean, I hope so, because I think they're going to need to. And finally, I will point out that I do not know that it will be essential for Labour to need to adopt single market membership before 2024. I'm not saying they may need to put themselves in that position. I think it's the best policy. It may not be strategically, I'll accept that, but it is possible that their current policy can win the day even in 2025. My issue is that they have already committed to much closer alignment, which would still boost trade. That's good. But the fact that the public may start to see single market as a good move, that a Tory MP has already started talking about it, and that Labour might resist it due to their cautious nature on the subject, that worries me. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.